All right, hey guys, this is Mrs. Van Newland, and we are going to go through lesson 3.5, which is on applying integer operations. So I would like you to go ahead and try this warm-up problem, and if you're just watching this video at home, you can also try this problem and see what you get. When you're done trying the problem, go ahead and push play. Okay, so now that you tried this problem, I'll just tell you, a lot of times kids or people will come up with different answers to this problem because they solve it in different ways. Some people might say, hey, I need to do -2 minus -4 first. Or some people say, oh, let's do 2 plus 6. So we are going to learn about something called the order of operations today that is used to solve problems and evaluate expressions. So that's our learning intention. So we're going to come back to this problem at the end of the video and we'll see how you did on it. So learning intention for today is to learn what the order of operation is and to evaluate expressions. All right, so in the past for order of operations, you maybe have seen something like PEMDAS, but at Bayview, we typically use something called GEMS or GEMDAS. Either you can kind of remember it a couple different ways. So here is what GEMS stands for. Okay, so the G stands for grouping symbols. So when you're given a problem, you need to solve anything that has parentheses or brackets, or these are kind of like another type of little brackets. Anything inside those you need to do first, and you still follow the order of operations. So you always look for those types of things. Next, if there's an exponent, okay, so if you have something squared or something to the third power, you do that next. Okay, that's where the E comes from, exponents. Okay, then the M stands for multiply and divide. Now, multiply and divide kind of go together. It's whatever one comes first. So if I see like 5 divided by 5 times 3, I go left to right because multiplication and division are the same. So I'm going to do 5 divided by 5 first and then do my timesing. So multiplication and division, they go together. And then finally we have the S, which is subtract and add. Again, adding and subtracting go together. It's left to right, whatever comes first. So if I have 5 minus 2 plus 3, I need to do 5 minus 2 first, and then I can add the last 3 in the back. Okay, sometimes you're going to see it as GEMDAS, which is basically kind of the same thing. You still have your grouping symbols. You still have your exponents. The M stands for multiply. The D stands for divide, but those kind of go together. And then the A stands for add. The S stands for subtract. Again, those go together, whatever comes first. We use the order of operations so that we all get the same answers to a problem and that we do things in the same order. If we didn't have that, we'd all be getting different answers. So now let's go ahead and actually try some problems where we use the order of operations. All right, I have 2 examples here, so let's go ahead and start with the first one. So there's different ways your teachers will show this, but sometimes we like to go through, or I'll have my kids go through and just like kind of find the adding and subtracting because I always save that to the end. Okay, so if I'm following my order of operations, let's look and see if we have any grouping symbols. Okay, I don't see any big sets of parentheses or brackets. Okay, exponents, don't see any. Okay, do I see any multiplying or dividing? I do. When 2 numbers are right next to each other, that means multiply. So let's go ahead and do -4 times 3. So -4 times 3 gives me -12. Okay, then I have plus a -7. Okay, so there's no more multiplying and dividing, so I'm done with that step. Now I go on to add and subtract, and I see adding. So I have 12 negatives and 7 more. So if you have 12 negatives plus 7 more negatives, you'd have total of 19 negatives because you just combine them. So you could also think like, oh, I had 12 of those negative integer chips and then 7 more. That's probably not 12 and 7, but if you add those up, you'd have 19 total. All right, let's go ahead and try example 2. So again, I kind of like to just find my adding and subtracting and be like, hey, I want to save that till last. So don't ever do that till kind of the end. All right, so right here, these 3 numbers next to each other, that's multiplying. And back here is dividing. Okay, so I am going to do whatever comes first, which is my multiplying. So I need to do -4 times -5 times -2. So 2 numbers at a time. So if I do a negative times a negative, I get a +20. And then I have 20 times negative 2. All right, well, I know 20 times 2 is 40, and then when you have one of each, it's negative for multiplying. Okay, I'm just going to bring that subtraction sign down because I don't add or subtract until the very end. I do see some division, though. So I'm going to do negative 8 divided by 2. Okay, I know 8 divided by 2 is 4. Negative divided by positive is a negative. All right, now all I see is subtraction. And when I see subtraction, I know the key is to change it to addition. So remember, you keep your first number, you change it to add, and then the opposite of negative 4 is 4. All right, lastly, I have positives and negatives. I can't put those together, so I need to subtract them. So it looks like I have more negatives, so my answer is negative. And then 40 take away 4 is 36. So my final solution to that problem is negative 36. All right, so let's go ahead and try example 3. Now we are going to do some evaluating. So our problem is this. It says evaluate w divided by xy plus y minus z to the third power. And then it tells us if w is 36, x is negative 6, y is negative 1, and z is negative 2. So if these are your notes, you could even highlight okay, here's a w. I know that's going to be 36. I'm just going to kind of match them up right now. Here's a couple y's. Every time I see a y, I'm going to do negative 1. I'll grab another color. Here's a x. Every time I see x, I'm going to do negative 6. And finally, I'll do green. Every time I see a z, I'm going to do negative 2. So when you guys are evaluating expressions, your teacher should have talked about that you need to kind of rewrite it. And every time you fill in a number for a variable, put parentheses if it's negative. So I see a w. So instead of a w, I'll put a 36 on the top. Okay, then on the bottom, I see x, y. That means x times y. So I'm going to put, for timesing, 2 sets of parentheses. Okay, so now I'm going to fill in, instead of x, I need to put negative 6. Instead of a y, I'm going to put a negative 1. Okay, then it says plus. It says y. Well, y is negative 1. I always put parentheses around negative numbers. And then it says minus. Okay, and then it says z. So I'll put parentheses because z is negative. Z is negative 2, and it says to the third power. So that is the first thing we should see you do, is rewrite it. So take a second to rewrite that if you haven't. Okay, now I always say to myself, I got to save that adding, subtracting till the end. I want to do everything else first. So order of operations, I don't see any parentheses. I see some division, some multiplying, adding, subtracting, and powers. Okay, so exponents comes next. So I'm going to do negative 2 to the third power. That means negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. Okay, when you multiply, do 2 at a time. So a negative times a negative is a positive 4. I use those. Now times negative 2. Well, 4 times negative 2 would give me negative 8. All right, now I'm going to rewrite kind of what I have. So I have 36 over negative 6 times negative 1 plus negative 1 minus, I got negative 8 back there. All right, so now let's go ahead and keep going. So now I need to do my division and multiplying. So here, this is division, and multiplying, I need to do kind of on the bottom to get this first. So negative times a negative is a positive 6. And then remember, this line here means divide. So I've got 36 on the top divided by 6. Well, 36 divided by 6 is 6. So now I see 6 plus negative 1 minus negative 8. Okay, so now let's go ahead and I've got only adding and subtracting left. So let's go left to right. So I've got 6 plus negative 1. Well, I've got more positives, 5 more, and then minus negative 8. All right, well, we do not like subtraction, so I'm going to keep my first number, change it to add, and then the opposite of negative 8 is 8. So finally, I just need to do 8 plus 5, which gives me 13. So my solution to this problem is 13. All right, we have one more problem. It says the average temperature in January in Helsinki, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but Finland, is about negative 5 degrees Celsius. So that's the average temperature. I'm just going to kind of highlight those. It says use the expression, and here's an expression, 9C plus 160 divided by 5, where C is the temperature in degrees Celsius. So that's what that C stands for, the temperature in degrees Celsius. We want to change it to degrees Fahrenheit. And it says round your answer to the nearest degree if necessary. So we want to get it to like the closest whole number. Okay, so right now we want to know, we always use Fahrenheit. So we want to know, can you change this -5 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit? And there's a formula to do that. And this is what it is. It says 9C plus 160 divided by 5. So all I have to do in this one is instead of a C, let's plug in what the temperature is. Well, we said it's -5. So I'm going to be plugging that in. So let's rewrite it. So I have parentheses, then I have 9 instead of a C. I'm going to put -5 plus 160, parentheses, and then divided by 5. Remember, whenever a number and a variable are right next to each other, there's like an invisible multiplication sign between those. So that tells you we're multiplying. All right, so now let's go ahead. We need to do whatever's in parentheses first. So this division bar kind of separates the two parts. I need to do what's on top and what's on bottom. Well, there's nothing on bottom, so I can just leave the 5. So let's do the top. So I get 9 times -5. Well, one of each, it's going to be negative, so -45 plus 160. Okay, again, I still have 5 on the bottom, so I don't need to do anything there. Let's do the top. So it looks like I have more positives. How many more? I'm going to do 160 minus 45. Okay, I'm going to have to borrow. 10 minus 5 is 5. 5 minus 4 is 1. And then 1 minus nothing is 1. So I've got 115 over 5. So remember, I talked about this, but this line right here means divide. So my last step is I'm going to do 115. I'm going to come write that over here. Divided by 5. All right, so 5 does not go into 1, but it does go into 11 2 times, which is 10. I'm going to subtract. 1 minus 0 is 1. I drop down the 5. 5 goes into 15 3 times, which is 15. I end up with 0, so I'm done. So 115 divided by 5 is 23 degrees Fahrenheit. So my temperature, -5 degrees Celsius, really is the same as 23 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, now that we learned about the order of operations and simplifying expressions, let's go back and try the warm-up using what we learned. So order of operations, remember anything in parentheses comes first, so my grouping symbol. So I see a big set of parentheses there. All right, so inside there, I still need to follow the order of operations. So I see multiplying and I see subtracting. I know multiplying comes first. So I'm going to do 4 times -2. Well, positive times a negative is a negative, so I get -8 minus -4 inside that set of parentheses. Okay, anytime we see subtraction, we've been changing it to addition. So I have -8 stays. I'm going to change that to add. The opposite of -4 is +4. So we got to keep going, got to get everything inside that parentheses done. So now -8 plus 4. So when I add integers, we see what do we have more of? We have more negatives. I have 4 more. So my answer is -4 inside the parentheses. So now let's rewrite it. I've got -8 squared divided by 2 plus 6 times -4. Okay, again, when it's right next to each other, it means times. So my order of operations, next comes exponents. So I'm going to do -8 squared, which is -8 times -8. A negative times a negative is a positive 64 divided by 2 plus 6 times -4. All right, finally, I need to do my dividing and my multiplying comes next. So save that adding till later. Sometimes I like to kind of highlight that to remind myself, like, don't do that till the end. So 64 split in half is 32 plus 6 times 4 is -24. All right, finally, when I'm adding integers, I can only put things together that are alike. These are not alike. This is a positive, that one's a negative. So I have more positives, so my answer is positive, and then I'm going to do a 32 take away 24. I need to borrow, that becomes a 12. 12 minus 4 is 8, so my answer is +8. I just solved that using the order of operations. And again, if we didn't have the order of operations, People would just solve this any way they wanted. So this is a way to get a common solution or answer to a problem. All right, so our learning intention for today is we're going to evaluate expressions using the order of operations. So hopefully you feel okay on solving problems using the order of operations. Remember, you need to do grouping symbols first. Even a division bar is kind of like a grouping symbol because you do whatever's on top and then whatever's on bottom. Then we do any exponents next. Then we do multiply and divide. That goes together, left to right. And subtract and add. Again, those go together. You always go left to right.